You're watching Experience Comic Culture in Sales, streaming live daily to Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter.
If you can read that, it's because I'm not backwards. If it's backwards, it's because you're backwards and you should read it backwards. It says, "What's up, the internet?" I'm producer Kyle. I have my own merch. I found my hat. It had been hidden in a short box for a month and a half. So I thought I would wear it. But today here on Devil's Advocates, we have a topic that has torn the comic industry asunder for years. But first, for those of you who are watching me on Bronze Age Nerds channel, I'm producer Kyle. He'll be here in a second. I want to tell y'all a story. Do you have a comic that because of the way you collect or how often you read it, you find yourself buying it more often than you would a normal comic? Like you have copies that are single issues, trades, hardcovers, collectible editions, omnibuses, however it gets printed, you buy it. For me, that's Sandman. I can't count how many different copies of Sandman I own or have bought. But beyond that, it's one issue. It's Sandman number 31. I probably have 20 different floppy copies, single issues of Sandman 31. I have every trade, I have every hardcover, I have everything. But that's 3 Septembers and a January for those of you keeping score. I have a problem with Sandman 31. That is that I've spent more money on one single issue of Sandman than I've ever spent on any other single issue of Sandman. And owning a copy of a book is one of the great joys of collecting, right? It's one of the few things you get that nobody else gets when you collect something is that you get to own it. But at some point, pragmatism has to win out, doesn't it? How many ways can I own a book? And how many more ways can the TSA destroy it going through an airline? Like, they've poured coffee on my comic books. They've torn them apart. They've gotten eaten by the freaking X-ray scanner machine. TSA has ruined more copies of this book than have ever been destroyed due to printing error or anything. So this is my trade paperback of Sandman Volume 2. 3 Septembers and a January. It's the 4th copy I've bought in 12 calendar months. I had one get stolen by a friend of mine who's no longer my friend. This is my digital copy. It changed. There it is. This is my digital copy. It's never been destroyed by the TSA. This is print versus digital. Tonight only on Devil's Advocates. Hello.
Hello, Kyle. How's it going today?
Not bad. The story got a little off the rails.
That's Devil's Advocates for you.
Well, I got a little fired up because I have to deal with the TSA tomorrow. And I'm not flying anywhere. I just have to renew my frequent flyer number. And I'm already pre-triggered. Ed, the story is that a friend of mine wanted to read Sandman Volume 2 before the new series of Sandman comes out and to listen to the audiobook. And I loaned them a copy of one of my 13 different Sandman Volume 2 trade paperbacks. And it did not come back. So that person's no longer my friend, but they got a copy of Sandman out of it.
Hey, real fast, I won't do this too often, but this is for a good cause. I want to highlight a comment that X11 Bravo put in the chat earlier. If you're watching over on the EXP, or if you're not familiar with X11 Bravo, we talk about them quite a bit on my channel. Fantastic community members. It's a group of veterans that do a project to help other veterans through comic books. And they're always looking out for veterans in the community. It's a cause that I care about a lot. There is a veteran right now who they were trying to do a fundraiser for. I tried to partake in that fundraiser as best I could. Unfortunately, it was to assist a veteran's wife, and she passed away during the efforts to raise some money to assist them. So if you're interested in supporting a cause like that, I'd urge you to go over to X11 Bravo on Instagram, check out their profile, and kind of, there's some posts about it recently. You'll find it right away. Go check that out and see if you're interested in donating to the GoFundMe that they raised for that great cause. I just wanted to take a second to talk about that.
X11 Bravo, if you're still here, put a link or put a comment with a link, and Jay will grab and we will share it to all of the 5 platforms we're live on. Always down to help people. It's a thing. Told you, of course, you have 13 copies. I have 13 copies only because my 14th copy is in the mail. I just ordered I have a well-loved version, or a well-loved set of the leather-bound trade paperbacks of Sandman.
Ooh.
Or leather-bound hardcovers. Well-loved. Spines are shot. So I just ordered a never-opened set that will live on a bookshelf and never be opened. Because, as we're going to talk about, I bought all of Sandman digitally so I don't have to read my copies anymore and keep destroying them.
Yeah, Sandman is what got me into adult comic books. I don't mean that like in the traditional way we use the word adult, but it's what got me away from reading G.I. Joe and Uncanny X-Men superhero books, right? Non-cape stuff. And man, such a great series. Never too many ways you can own that. And yeah, that's digital versus print is the topic of the show tonight, everybody. Just real fast, I want to tease something that might happen. I am in the middle of a terrible thunderstorm and power has been flickering here over the last half hour. So if I drop out, don't worry. We have a professional in the house that can help pick up the slack. We also have Kyle. So Kyle can fill in. And no, I'm just kidding. Kyle's a consummate professional. So if I drop out for a while, I'll try to come back whenever I can, but that's probably what happened.
Yeah, that or he's running for his basement because Ohio weather is coming.
Yeah. That's funny.
So one of the other things, well, there are 2 other things. We'll cover them right now at the top of the show. Phone lines will be open here momentarily for you to call in to share your, as soon as I click on the button to turn them on, to share your thoughts on this topic. So that'll be a thing. And then we have done a thing, Bronze and I want to know what you want us to talk about. So we have a place where you should tell us, where you could tell us what to do. So I will get that link over to Jay and he can share it later. It's our digital suggestion box, which is a place where you could tell us topics you'd like us to talk about on the air.
Jeff is quick. If the power goes out, you can still read a paper by candlelight or burn it to stay warm. So early lead. Now, here's the other thing I'll say. I got my tablet all charged up and ready to go.
I'm at like 100. I'm at like 100%, and I've got several backup chargers.
But I love it, Jeff. Great comment.
Thank you, X11 Bravo. Here are the links. I think they're all the same, probably. I don't know why Jay would put a random GoFundMe in there if it wasn't X11 Bravos. So these are your links in the comments now. You can click on to go support them. Great cause. Talk about multiple heroes with the same name. Why did you guys name the Flash at the same time? Dan, put that in the link.
Yeah, link just got dropped in chat, guys. So this is awesome. Something we've been talking about for a while. Kyle and I behind the scenes. We want a way for you guys to be able to come in and say, hey, this is our next topic for Devil's Advocates. If you guys want to talk about it, that's something we want to talk about most likely. So go ahead and drop those suggestions in. Look forward to that. I'll be spreading that out on my socials here over the next week as well. Cool.
So let's get into it. Jeff Wedding already coming with the, you can light a piece of paper on fire as a thing. And Ed, if I call in, will I get electrocuted from Bronze's lightning? No, because it's the one nice day a year here where I am. So, or why reading comics makes you grow a beard?
Well, it just depends. If you read manly comics, they make you grow a manly beard. If you drink,
I was thinking laziness, but yes.
Oh,
so busy reading comics, you forget to shave.
Is that it? I don't know.
I don't know either.
You want something to kind of like, caress the pages as you turn the pages. I think that's kind of what it is.
Have you ever held a comic open with your face hair?
Maybe. Especially those like trade paperbacks where like, it starts to kind of lean over one side more than the other when you first crack it open. Can kind of, wedge it in there. It helps a little bit.
Yeah. Been there. So we want to talk about digital versus print. And we wrote our notes and I was reading the notes Bronze sent me because I was kind of seeing where each thing was. And the first thing you said is that no one should tell you how to read comics, and you shouldn't tell anyone how to read comics, which is true. So anything we say is just kind of our thoughts on the topic. We're not telling you how you should consume comics, and vice versa. You're not going to change my mind.
Well, and also that couch is a very important part of this conversation, in my opinion. It kind of goes along with our last week's topic. By the way, if you haven't watched last week's episode, go check it out. It's about should you slab or not slab. And that's a very charged topic, much like the electricity above my roof. And the reason why is because there's a lot of people in the hobby that want to say, this is right or this is wrong. You should or shouldn't do it, and this is why. And everybody should have their opinion. They should be allowed to share it. And some people have fantastic points. I hope we hear about some of those in the chat tonight from you guys. But part of the problem is that when it comes to personal preference, if you prefer to read digitally, or if you prefer to read print, or you have your combination method for reading one way or the other, that's all that really matters. Now, there's a lot of nuance to that conversation we can talk about, and we're going to hope to fill you in on that tonight. But at the same time, don't let anybody tell you that you should be ashamed of reading digitally, or you have to read print or whatever. That's just not the case.
So we were talking about this a little bit last week, and I said that my opinion had changed over the last 2 weeks. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. And I'll tell you that story so we can kind of frame everything up. I am, at my core, a print comics are best comics person. However, pragmatism has become a thing I have to think about in my life. I'm traveling more. I'm away from my collection more than I have been previous. And carrying this through LaGuardia Airport is heavy. Carrying this through LaGuardia Airport is a bigger pain in the neck at TSA, but it's lighter somehow. So that's the beginning. But where it really came from is my family does competition barbecue, which is a fun little hobby that I have. But when we go to these contests, there's a lot of sit around and wait, right? You light the fire, you got to sit around and wait for the smoker to come up. Then you put the brisket on, you got to sit around and wait for the brisket to cook, that kind of stuff. And while there's activities to do during that time, it's not busy. So I would always take comic books to read. But at 4:30 in the morning when it's dark out, it's really hard to read a print comic. So now you got to take like one of those headlamps or a light of some kind, and then bugs come to you. And now you're getting bit up by mosquitoes and other kind of bugs, and it's a pain in the neck. So this year I decided to give Kindle a chance. And I bought a bunch of stuff digitally for the first time. And taking that, and I can read it in the car, regardless of if I've got a cell connection. I can read it, and the pages get smoky. I can read it in a lounge chair without an internet connection. I can read it in the trailer. I can read it anywhere I go. And I don't necessarily have to have an internet connection, which is great. I thought you did. So now my books don't get ruined. I've got something that I can carry with me everywhere I go. It's lighter, and it doesn't get ruined, and I can see it at night. All of a sudden, I'm starting to go, gee, the check marks for digital are going up and up and up. And then I figured out how to turn this feature on.
Oh, yeah. The guided view.
Yeah. One of the problems I have with digital books for so long is, what do I read when? Because the layouts don't always look the same as when it's a book. Guided view, guys. Game changer. So that's where my side of this is coming from these days, is I've recently been enlightened to the ways of digital comics. For years, I fought them. But man, it's changing my whole perspective.
Yeah. Well, not to bury the lead too much, but I'm a big believer in kind of the hybrid method, right? Like, I think that there's no one way that I'm going to read my comic books. I read physical comic books, raw, floppy comic books. I read trade paperbacks, omnibus, and digital. Primarily these days, where I'm reading most of my comic books is digital, because I do have a whole list of advantages, and I'm going to use this since Kyle did a really good job of explaining kind of the experience. No pun intended. I'm going to get into some of the pros of digital as I see them, and we're going to kind of take these down as bullet points. And I'm going to start with digital, not to bury the lead here, but I think we all know that we all love reading physical comic books. I think that's almost like a universal sentiment. There's very few people out there that hate reading physical comic books, whether that's trades or the actual floppy copies. So I'm going to start with the digital to kind of maybe see if I can open up some eyes here. One of the biggest pros to me for reading a digital comic book is it can actually be significantly cheaper. And it's cheaper in a few different ways. The first way is you can often find sales on like collections, like digital trade paperbacks, essentially. Now, most comic books, especially from Marvel, DC, when they come out, they're still full price, normal price, but there are sales. And there are way more often digital sales than there are physical sales, unless a comic's value just drops over time, right? So that's one real benefit is if you want to read a lot of comic books, there's almost no better way. Like I was going back, the reason I started reading digital like full time was I was going back and reading the Uncanny X-Men run, and going back and buying like all those collected editions is pretty expensive. But I picked up, there was like a Marvel sale in Comixology a few years ago, and I picked up issues 0 or 1 through, they start at -1 for the flashback issue, all the way through 150 for like $40 or something like that. That's insane, right? Like that would be several volumes worth of trade paperbacks to do that. That's a huge advantage.
Absolutely.
And then so Kyle mentioned the guided view.
Throw out real quick.
Oh yeah.
Humble Bundle. One of the great ways I found a lot of books I never would have read is through Humble Bundle. Dynamite does them, but a lot of other people do them too, where it's 100 books for $20 and it's for charity. So that's another way. And then, that's what Bronze was saying. Like, if you want to read giant size X-Men, the average person isn't gonna be able to drop that kind of coin, but you can buy the digital copy for cheap. So go ahead.
Yeah. So the next point, and I'll tease that out. I said cheaper in a number of different ways. I'm not just talking about the price of entry, but I'll get to those in a second. It also, with Kyle mentioned the guided view. Now that's not available on like the Humble Bundles. If you buy the Humble Bundles, you're probably, in my experience, you're usually downloading PDFs, which unless I think there's a couple readers out there that can kind of mimic the guided view. But for the most part, if you're reading on like the Marvel app, if you're reading on Comixology, every comic added there has a guided view. So the way I have mine set up is it opens up the full page, and I see the full page just like you would if you were reading a physical comic book. I personally am reading on my Samsung tablet. It's a nice, big, beautiful screen. And then when I swipe, or I can press the volume button, I move to like one panel. It's kind of an animated style. It moves to the next panel. You can turn off the animation so it just goes fast if you want it to. And it kind of guides you through each panel. So you're getting kind of a more close-up look, full zoomed in of the artwork instead of having to pinch to zoom every time, which you can also do. If you really want to pixel peep and look at the artwork really close up, there's a lot of really detailed artwork out there. Adam Warren does amazing detailed artwork. Looking at his stuff like on the Empowered books and like zooming in on some of his line work is incredible. I get to see detail there that I'd have to break out, a magnifying glass or whatever if I really wanted to see in better detail. Which, by the way, I wear glasses for a reason. I'm farsighted. Seeing stuff close up is very tough. I can get new prescriptions and all that. But in between those prescriptions, it's much easier for me to physically read the comic book and enjoy it and see all that fantastic artwork up close. Is it, something that I can't do on physical? No, I can still do that. But it's a much different experience, and it makes binge reading so much nicer. Like I can zip through a comic, just tap, 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 because I read pretty quickly. It depends on the artwork. If I want to slow down and admire the artwork a little bit more, obviously, there's reasons why you might want to do that. And that can definitely make it take longer. But for stuff like Something Is Killing the Children, like I just zipped through that so fast because I'm just like page turning digitally. And I love that experience.
That was something that Jenna on the show before us on the experience brought up, is she has ocular problems. Well, digital reading is really helpful because she can zoom, she can do things she needs to do. For me, because of the way my eyes are shot, I either have to wear bifocals when I read digitally, or I have to do this number, which makes it really hurt when you fall asleep looking at your iPad and you're reading your comics and it falls on your face.
Yeah.
That's a theme from our Tuesday night in Stores This Week show. But the guided view means I don't have to do that. Makes it really nice. That was something I was going to bring up, and I was figure drawing and Xbox Gamer are both kind of talking about it. So one of my later points that I'm going to come to remind me to talk about that, guys. Freeding and the manga method, I guess. Yep. One of the other things for me, and we keep talking about digital, but I'm going to throw another digital thing. It's formatted like it's meant to be formatted. When you read a comic, they can't control how you look at the page, right? It's not even in guided view. In a digital book, things are a little easier or more orderly. So if you have, like me, ADHD, you're not looking at this page while you're supposed to be reading this page, right? It kind of keeps you on track. And that's a huge benefit, again, for somebody like me who does have ADHD and struggles sometimes with reading. We'll read PDFs. We have to read 10 PDFs for tomorrow's show. Myself, Jay, and Dan Wickline all read them. Sometimes it's really hard not to get distracted by the things around you and the other things happening on the page. So having it formatted the way you want, having it, kind of just go in order. So you just go page, 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 means that I can actually read the books and not like go, I think I read that book. It's a huge difference, especially when your brain is already apt to not be paying attention.
Yeah. 100%. I mean, that kind of goes along with what my next point is about a pro for reading digitally. Another reason that I started reading digitally was because I had a newborn and then eventually, a toddler. And, there's this physical concern reading comic books. I'm somebody who's very meticulous with my comic books. That's one nice word you could use. The other way you could describe it is anal. I handle my comic books in a very particular fashion. And I have way before grading comic books. It's just how I am. And when I go and read a comic book, I want to keep it, in a very clean, safe spot. I know nothing's going to get dropped on it, fall on it. Well, when you have a 2 to 4 year old screaming death machine running around your house, there's no controlling when she's just going to run up and want to, get a hug from daddy or whatever, even if she was engaged in something else a minute ago. Talk about the ultimate ADHD there in kids everywhere. And so, I quickly learned, I wasn't really reading like raw comic books, but even trades. I don't want my trades all bent or dinged up or whatever. And she was really good. Like, I don't want to paint a bad picture of my daughter. She's awesome about comic books, but at the same time, you got to be a little careful. And that's true, not just in that particular scenario, but yeah, like you're talking about going on the airplane, like, your tablet can hold so much more, or your phone, depending on what people read on. It can hold so much more. You don't have to worry about dinging up your collection. The comment about the smoker, like your pages getting smoky, all those different reasons. That's a much different story. Now, of course, if you're reading like on a tablet, I think that's where most people read. There are physical concerns there too, of course, just like you have with any electronic device. But I feel like anywhere you're going to read a tablet and feel like you're safe doing it, it's not going to get water damage or any of that kind of stuff or dropped. You're going to be extra safe than you would be compared to reading a physical comic book. So that's a huge benefit too, right? Like there's comic books I have in my collection that I'm not afraid to handle my comic books, but it doesn't mean I necessarily want to, break out a comic book willy-nilly and kind of have to like make sure I have a space cleared off for it to read because I've got a small place and I want to make sure it's a safe environment, right? The other part of that is how quickly I can get to a comic book if I'm trying to look something up. Like what happened on that panel? Like there's a lot of stuff I do for my channel, like research, where it's like, hey, what panel did that character appear on? Well, I can now quickly go to that instead of having to dig through my long boxes and my short boxes and my filing cabinet sitting next to me here and find the comic book, pull it out. Oh, you grabbed the wrong issue. Okay, go back and grab the next issue. So there's some ease that really kind of gets introduced there as well.
Yeah, most of my comics live here. I don't live here. So if I want to look something up, I've got to have a digital copy or I've got to trust the internet. And we all know you can't trust the internet. So,
Some great comments.
When we come back, we'll get to some of the comments.
Yeah.
And we're going to get to what I think are one of the biggest cons to digital books when we come back after this break. Before
Sounds
we
good.
go to this break, if you're watching on the Bronze Age Nerd channel, hi, I'm producer Kyle. I am the executive producer and chief technical director of the comic book of the experience, _EXP most places. Search us out on YouTube. Jay will put the link in the comments probably. And check us out. Hit subscribe, click the bell. If you're watching on the experience, you know the drill. Head over to Bronze Age Nerds channel, click subscribe, click the bell, click the thumbs up. Do all the things Nick tells you to do in every show all the time. Because he's probably doing it in Bronze's shows too. Check us out. We've got shows 7 days a week, all this kind of stuff. So we will be right back after this quick word from us about other stuff that's happening to keep talking digital versus print. You know how when you go to Comic-Con, after Comic-Con, you go to the hotel bar, and there's a whole bunch of people playing music and dancing, and you've got Pikachu and Lara Croft Tomb Raider doing the cha-cha slide just down from Deadpool and Batman and Wonder Woman? That's every Saturday night over on the Experience Twitch channel. Join Taji Beats for the EXP Dance Party, exclusively on Twitch, twitch.tv/the_EXP.
To be continued. 3 little words that hold the secret to the next great story. 3 words that will thrill you, confound you, give life to new possibilities. Every variation of To Be Continued is a promise. A promise of adventure. A promise of excitement. A promise of unseen wonders and unexplored worlds. A promise that every issue you read makes you a part of a never-ending journey. And behind every page, there will be an unopened door waiting for you. This story to be continued at your local comic book shop today. Visit comicshoplocator.com today.
Did you know that every Experience show, including some exclusive content, streams on Twitch? Check it out. Twitch.tv/the_EXP. Or just scan that QR code. Welcome back, everybody. This is Devil's Advocates. I'm producer Kyle. That is Bronze Age Nerd. What's up? Welcome in. We're talking print versus digital. And should we talk about what I think is the biggest concern about digital reading?
Yeah. We've covered a lot of the pros. There's a few more, but you guys kind of get the picture. We definitely need to address the other side. This is the Devil's Advocates. We want to talk about both sides of the conversation.
The thing about physical comics is that you can own them. The thing about digital comics is that you're essentially renting them. And when I say that, I mean, if the service you buy them on decides not to offer that service anymore, you are, as the kids say, SOL. And that sucks. You hate to buy something on one service and then be like, well, we know you bought it, but we don't do that anymore. It'd be like, getting your pancakes taken away in the middle of breakfast. And they're like, no, it's lunchtime. Doesn't really work that way. Right.
That'd be terrible.
Right. We haven't had a food analogy in like 2 shows, so I had to come up with one.
There'll always be one.
There will. But it's the same with digital music and kind of stuff like that. Like having a conversation with a friend of mine about Spotify versus Apple Music and how both of those are really great for musicians and fans. But at the end of the day, if you unsubscribe from one, you lose all the crap you had saved there. And now you've got to rebuy everything or reacquire everything. And it's an interesting kind of situation to find yourself in.
Yeah. The interesting thing is the case study for this is Comixology is, as the kids say, going through some stuff. And which sucks. I've actually, for the most part, had a pretty good experience with Comixology until the revamp that they did on the app a little while ago. Now, Marvel has kind of had this cool thing where they've stepped in, and if you've owned books on Comixology that were Marvel books and you have your account connected to the Marvel, account side of things, you actually can get your access to all of your books now through Marvel Unlimited. And that works perfect. That's been seamless. But the concern does come into play. If you picked up some comic books on a service that is going under, or you like you don't want to subscribe to it anymore, and have a premium fee associated with it. And then here's the other weird little rub that can happen when it comes to not owning something anymore. There's been a lot of issues, pun intended, that have been recalled for various reasons. Often what happens is those digital copies are then immediately changed, like they, whatever master file they use for the reprinting of that issue.
Wait. You mean Batman's thing wasn't that big to begin with?
That's probably one of the better examples to give. There's some really
one of my favorite ones, one of the oldest ones is, do you remember the Saga 8 story?
No, because I read Saga way after the fact.
So when Saga 8 came out, Apple refused to put it in its store.
Okay.
Because the first several panels are quite graphic.
Yeah.
So for Apple release, they changed the panels. Like 2 days after it came out, you could buy it on Apple again, but it was a slightly edited version. The things that were graphic were super blurry. Kind of like that.
Interesting.
So like it's fixed now. It's back to normal now.
Okay.
Like it's no longer edited. But there at first, like, because Apple's book rules didn't have any, I think it had to do with anyone could buy anything. There were no age restrictions on who could purchase what in Apple books.
Okay.
When that went away, they changed it back. I'm pretty sure.
Interesting.
So it's like Saga was a problem digitally at first. And
there's been several instances. I'm not going to give too much spotlight to any one of them. There's been several incidences where an artist has included something that has been kind of pretty instantly deemed questionable by the general public.
X-Men Gold.
And then X-Men Gold, Immortal Hulk, I'm not going to talk too much about all the specifics. And then those get updated immediately. Now, I guess for me, the kind of counter argument to that con is that's a pretty fringe case. It doesn't happen all the time. You can usually seek out, if you want to see what the panel looked like beforehand. But you do kind of get into this special edition kind of George Lucas-y kind of territory here, where if you want to own the original as it was originally printed, or digitally printed, however you want to put it, that can be kind of a problem. And then the actual physical rights to owning something are obviously, when you own the physical thing, you own that thing. Like nobody's gonna come take it from you, and if they do, we call that theft. Whereas with digital, it could happen for any number of reasons. But I think that's kind of inherent with anytime we make a digital purchase. We kind of know that's a risk involved. What has been really awesome to see is when things have, like, a company goes under and then they no longer offer their digital services. This has happened with movie streaming several times. You see usually another company swoop in and say, hey, we're gonna buy up the rights or however that works on the back end so that you can still access your library as long as you're a member through our service. I think if you're going through a bigger service, it probably minimizes the risk you have of losing your digital goods, but it is a concern, and it's one that's like impossible not to address.
But one of the examples to this, I will say, is HBO Max and Netflix. And the example I'm going to use is Friends. I don't know how many of you can recite Friends from basically beginning to end like my friends and I can, but Friends is a big deal. Well, Friends used to be on the Netflix, and now it's on the HBO Max. And several of us had to go out and get HBO Max because of Friends. And that's one of those things that sometimes you do wind up having to pay double, right? Regardless of how big the service is, you just got to watch when you're getting into this kind of stuff, that if it's something that you feel like you can't live without for a time, you're making that purchase in a more tangible way. Like, I own Friends digitally because I bought it from Amazon, right? So even when it wasn't on, I could go on Amazon and hit play, right? Because that, Amazon is not going to end their you own it digital service in the middle of HBO Max and Netflix fighting, because that's the only chance Amazon's got. So it's one of those things is that, know who's going to own your stuff. One of the other ones, and I wanted to get to it here, is Dwayne. Biggest con to buying a digital issue is the physical copy shoots way up in value. Digital issues don't appreciate. They just don't. But a lot of the time, if you're buying something digitally, it's because you're more interested in reading it than flipping it or selling it at some point, collecting it. So it makes, it's a little bit of a different mentality, I think.
Until Distillery launches.
Well, that's in my notes.
Yeah.
And I didn't get around to it. So Miss Jen today on Talking Shop had Ram V on, who is one of the founding creators on Distillery. And he talked a lot about their digital platforming.
Oh, cool.
And I wish I got busy in between shows, or I would have pulled the clip. Jay, if you are able to, in a hurry, go grab it, that would be hugely helpful. If not, it's fine. But one of the things he talked about was the ability to, if you buy a digital copy, sell your digital copy. And how that was an interesting thing that on the business end, he wasn't at all involved with. Like that's a business thing. But on a creative end, it gives an interesting challenge to creators. Right? Because it gives them a way to see digitally how successful their book is. When you do something print, you can always see the print numbers. But a lot of times once something is released digitally, those numbers are just kind of ethereal. Now it goes, okay, well, this people bought this book and then they read it and sold it to somebody else. And that gives you gives you a track record. Figure drawing, that's one of those things that's what Ram said. He goes, it might be something like that, but he hopes it's not. Right. That's one of those things is they haven't really rolled out what that information looks like yet.
But the other part of that too, just to talk about that, especially when it comes, and we're kind of getting into a very niche thing when it comes to Distillery, which is a service that hasn't even launched yet. There is this weird concept though, because that's kind of like the day one edition, or you can get one of the comp copies from, James Tinian or something like that. Like you get his personal comp copy, and that'll have kind of like a pedigree to it maybe, but you also can just buy the book. Right. And in defense of that, most ways you read digitally, you can always just buy the book. Yes, they don't appreciate in value, which is kind of the larger question here in general. But I would also point out the flip side is they don't depreciate in value in a way either, because, think about every run filler of a title for several years after it comes out becomes worth less. It's kind of like driving a new car off the lot. It becomes worth less. Like, who's going to pay more than a couple bucks for some random Green Lantern issue that, there's no key in it. It doesn't have a cool cover. It's the middle of a story arc. That's the flip side there is that comic book can end up in a dollar bin really fast. And so when you bought it digitally, you're not like losing value on it. You might have even got it for cheaper because it was sold as part of, you bought the whole run of that story for 30% off or something like that, which also can happen. So it's kind of a nuanced discussion when you get to the value part there, but it's a great point to bring up.
Yeah. One of the other ones for me, at least, that is an interesting part of this reason for print is that, and you and I both kind of put it in our notes, the tactile, right?
Yep.
Being able to flip through the pages of a book, being able to look at the page, being able to smell it, that's not a thing you can get from a digital book. And that is such a part of reading comics. Yeah. That it almost can't be measured, right? Like, so many people, when you talk about old comics, especially, first thing they talk about is the smell, not the way the paper feels, not the way it holds color, none of that. It's the smell.
I'm addicted to that smell.
Right. And it's just a little bit moldy, but not bad. But that's a thing you can't really achieve yet in digital. And that kind of sucks.
100%. And there's something that you just, it's not replicatable. It's something that is just intrinsic to it. And it's not just the ability to feel. If you're talking about like a comic that was printed on newsprint, like the actual inside pages, they're not that glossy or newer paper. It actually, the way that the color and the ink on the printing sits on there is just different. When you get like the digital version of a comic book from the Silver Age, for example, you're getting like, the color adjusted bright versions of those colors, and it looks different. It just straight up looks different. It's brighter, it's flashier in some ways, but it doesn't have that same aged look to it that you're going to get if you crack open that copy of X-Men 50 or whatever it is that you're looking at. And that's a huge difference. The flip side, though, is that some of those comic books, like we talked about earlier, are really hard to acquire and really expensive to acquire, at least. And then you might not get the ability to do that anyway. So at least it gives you the option of being able to read it. But that's another, getting that. I was talking about being able to zoom in on the line work, seeing the way that a comic book is printed and the ads and everything in one of those older comic books is a huge part of the experience. Jenna just brought up, the feel of the paper too is just this big tactile sensation that you just can't replicate. It's amazing.
Cool. So let's do this. I have a couple of things I still want to talk about, but let's take our next commercial break real fast. And when we come back, we're going to get into the nitty gritty of some of the options and what I think kind of the future looks like. We'll kind of talk about that just a little bit. And the phone lines are still open if any of you guys want to call in.
Seriously, guys, call in. We don't often take guests on like my show, for example. This is your chance to call in and ask a question, even if it's, a little out there. We're willing to take it. We'd love to hear it.
Yep. 567-318-6507. 567-318-6507. So we'll be right back after this here on.
You just finished the last episode of your favorite news show, and you just have to talk about it. But all your friends are ghosting you because of that incident last week at the buffet. Oh, you know the one. What you did to that chowder. Ugh. Keeps me up at night. So what do? Join writer Dan Wickline as he breaks down all your favorite pop culture media. Whether it's a review of the latest nerdy TV show or a dive back into the history of your favorite comic characters, Dan's ready to discuss all the hottest topics live. Join the conversation as Dan live streams Tuesday through Thursday at 5 Eastern, 2 Pacific on Twitch, Twitter, YouTube, and Facebook. The Dan Wickline Show on The Experience. Comic culture and sales.
Go follow The Experience on TikTok at @the_EXP1 or scan the QR code on the screen. Our TikTok is like everywhere else we are, except you only have to deal with us for a minute. Seems like a win-win to me. Welcome back in, everybody. This is Devil's Advocates. I'm producer Kyle. That's Bronze Age Nerd. If you're watching on his channel, please come over and hit subscribe and click the bell on the EXP. If you're watching on the EXP, please head over to his channel, click subscribe, click the bell over there so that you can see all of the stuff. This is the last week. We'll be on both channels. So starting next week, just on the EXP. So make sure you check that one out.
Yeah, in fact, do me a favor. If you're watching over on my channel, do me a huge favor. Please, right now, head on over to the EXP, search for _EXP on YouTube.
Yeah, put the link in the comments.
Yeah, and go ahead and make that, make that subscribe right now. Let's get all the viewers over on the EXP so that you know where to come next Monday.
Awesome. So we kind of mentioned it last segment, but it got brought up before. So figure drawing talked about freeding, which is an interesting concept, and it's something I want to talk about. And then Xbox Gamer mentioned manga.
Yeah.
There are two companies that are really kind of in the forefront of what digital comics could be right now, in my opinion. One of them we've discussed is Distillery, right? They're trying to come up with a way to make digital comics behave more like traditional comics in terms of a secondary aftermarket. The other company is a company called Saturday AM. I don't know if you're familiar, Bronze, or anybody in the comments, but
I'm not.
Saturday AM is the most diverse group of mangaka in the world. They are they're an American company publishing manga made by people of not just Asian creators, but people of color and creators from all over the world. And the way they launched actually wasn't in print. They had the most popular manga on the planet in terms of web searches, and all they had was an app. And the deal with the app was subscribing to Saturday AM's app was like subscribing to Shonen Jump in the 90s. Right? If you want to know what was happening in Dragon Ball, you had to be subscribed to Shonen Jump. Right? And every month you get your magazine, you'd read your little Shonen Jump story, you'd read whatever else was in that magazine, you know, your little Dragon Ball story, whatever. And then you would know. So their app was the similar concept, right? You paid a monthly fee to the app, and every month you got in the app new content from all of these books. Well, then Apple Black became so popular, it forced them into physical printing. They partnered with a company that's name I can't remember because I always mispronounce it in front of the people from the company. It's always real awkward. But they're printing the books, right, for them. And now they're in Barnes & Noble and Books A Million and Walmart and Target, and they're one of the most popular manga on the market. And I think that and the webtoon model are really kind of things that we need to pay attention to, but we don't know yet, right? So this was like Marvel Unlimited, except Marvel was releasing content to you there just for a monthly fee, rather than, okay, I have Marvel Unlimited, I have to go in and choose what I want and pay for what I want and that kind of stuff, right? It's here's your books, right? And Webtoon is similar, right? It's a pay service that you can subscribe to, or you don't have to. Some of it's free, and you read essentially one big long strip, right, of comic book. And that's so awkward for people right now. And it was awkward for me when I first started dealing with Saturday AM because it's so different to what I'm used to.
Yeah.
So we kind of wrapped up our notes or whatever with kind of what is our point? What are our thoughts on the thing? And for me, print will always be first. I will always want to own print copies, physical copies of books. But digital is for me becoming a more important tool in my collecting habit, in my collecting hobby. And it's really the only advancement that's happening. When you look at comics, they're being printed the same way they were printed before. Paper is regressing because of the availability of paper. Print quality is regressing because of the availability of printing. Like, there's a lot of stuff that isn't advancing, but digital is. And because it's the only thing advancing, it's this tightrope walk that has to happen as the tech changes, right? As VR becomes more proliferant. Proliferant? Is that the word?
Prolific.
Proliferated. Look, as more people have them stupid headsets that don't fit on people with glasses, comics are going to have to find a way to be read in that world. Comics in the metaverse, that kind of thing. And the big thing that I think is important is that we as fans can't jump up and down and shout down good ideas just because they're new. We need to see what happens with these concepts, and maybe it'll change the way you read.
Yeah. And to build on that, there's something I talk about pretty often, and I think a lot of comic book collectors, especially those that are in it for value related purposes, or they appreciate the value of their comic books, they want their comic books to be worth something someday. it's not just those collectors, but that's a big part of this. They don't see the long run of what's going on with comic books sometimes. We're not getting new readers in comic books. We're not getting kind of this next wave of collectors. And if let's say you're somebody who's 30 years old right now and you've got some nice comic books, and let's say you're hoping to sell some of them in 25, 30 years when they've really appreciated and got a ton of value. Well, of course, some of those comic books are going to be worth money because people are still going to love characters like Spider-Man. And, an AF-15 is considered like a holy grail for some people that don't even collect comic books, right? Like that's just how important those kinds of things are. But I can easily see a world where some hot comic books today that are worth, decent money aren't worth substantially more in 25, 30 years because the people that want to collect those comic books are, to be honest, dying out. Whether that's they're not interested in comic books anymore and they don't buy them, or literally, and their kids and those around them aren't buying and collecting comic books. And what is something that manga has done amazingly well? It's digital. They have secured more readers. They're growing. Comic books readership, it's impossible to say for sure, but I think I'm very safe to say that it's shrinking, or at least plateaued. It's not growing. That much is obvious. It's not like, you might have people buying multiple copies of certain issues, sort of like what we saw in the 90s, but it doesn't mean that there's more readers flocking to those issues. Of course, there are some new readers out there. Everybody can point to like, oh, I introduced my nephew to Miles Morales and now he reads comic books or something like that. That's awesome. But we need like 10 for every one of those that we're getting, or at least 5 or something, right? Right. And it's just not happening. And without, digital, and we've seen the success in the manga model, without that coming to, Western style comics, whatever you want to call it, the US, we are going to be running into that issue. And it doesn't mean that digital is the only answer, but I think it's part of the solution.
Yeah, I think the idea is this, right? For me, at least, is, as I say it like this, don't be an old head.
Yeah.
Just because it's always been that way doesn't mean it always will. People were angry when Johnny Cash put rock and roll into country music, and now look at country music. Right? Country music isn't worse, it's just different. Comics, people didn't like it when we started printing comics in color. But comics aren't worse, they're just different. It's through every change, you've had this ebb and flow. And we're at this time now where young readers don't want to read 22 pages of mediocre content. They want to read 122 pages of Dogman, of top quality content. When we were growing up reading Goosebumps, they're reading Dogman. They're reading graphic novels. We were reading novels. It's a different demon now. And for us as comic readers to think that the way we've always read comics is the right way to read comics is arrogant. And it's going to be the end of our fandom. But if we are willing to accept ideas like Distillery, ideas like what manga's doing, ideas like Saturday AM or Webtoon, as a way that's appropriate to get our Spider-Man stories in conjunction with a print thing, then we can actually see our industry grow.
And I'm glad you said in conjunction, because that's the big key for this. Is there's people that are, I sense a lot of people are really upset about the idea of digital replacing print. And that's not going to happen wholesale anytime soon. There have been some experiments with digital only releases from like major companies, like the DC did the black and white issues for a few different series a few years ago. That does happen. I'm not trying to say like it could never happen, but print comic books are still extremely popular, and I don't think that we're going to see a full replacement of digital overprint for a very long time, if ever, maybe, because people still want to collect print comic books, and you're talking about two things that can work in conjunction with each other and maybe even help each other at times, especially for established series. Yes, of course, there's digital only comic books out there, just like there's print only comic books out there, but I just think that it's one of those things where you have to kind of consider it being That's not a one versus the other format war like HD DVD and Blu-ray or something like that, or VHS and Betamax. I don't see it happening like that. I think it's going to be something where they can live in harmony.
Yeah. So couple things. Figure drawing. I don't like manga being compared to Western comics. Unfortunately, man, manga is 50+% of this industry now. If you're talking about the comic book industry, and especially the local comic shop in the United States, if they're not carrying manga, they're not doing as well as they could be doing. They're likely struggling. This manga is an ever increasing, ever important, growing segment in this community. For every comic book I read, I probably read 3 comic books to every manga at this point, but I read almost as many manga in a month as I do comic books.
Well, and I think the other part of that comment that is important to address is
they are different.
They're different, but I'm comparing more the readerships than I am the actual, like, I don't want comic books to become manga, or vice versa. I think it's cool to bring in elements of that sometimes, but I'm just comparing like how they're attracting readerships and how they're evolving or growing with the times and what we can learn from that as Western comic books collectors.
Right. Dwayne's Payne, do you think lower readership is due to story quality or oversaturation of certain characters that turn folks off stories, or are not as fresh as manga appears to be?
Boy, I think that first part of that is a potentially excellent topic for a future episode of Devil's Advocates, because this is a sentiment I see expressed over and over and over again in the comics community, and to an extent, I have part of that sentiment. Like I when I go dive into ultra modern, new release comic books, oftentimes I'm not as engaged as I am reading older stuff. So I think that would be a great topic. I think it's a combination of factors, though. I really think that we've been on a roller coaster ever since the 90s comic crash, whatever you want to call it, when it comes to collecting, because collecting and the material factor of collecting got tied up with what comic books were so intrinsically. And then when the values all crashed because too many gimmicks came out and Death of Superman and foil covers and all that stuff that we all talk about, I think that there's kind of been this weird stigma kind of hanging over collecting comic books for value. And I think as collectors are aging up, it's a growing topic of concern. Most of my viewers of my channel about comic books all are concerned about the value of comic books. And so I've had to focus on that a little bit more, because as adult collectors, what are they doing? They're going back and buying stuff that's worth money from when they were kids. And they think like, oh, I have enough money now, I can go buy that, or I can track it back down and recapture that nostalgia. And then they're comparing what they're doing with that collecting habit to what's coming out on the store shelves, and they're seeing like a disconnect. So I think it's a fascinating topic, and I don't think that it's necessarily something that we can easily explain at the end of the show here, in my opinion.
I'll take a stab at easily explaining it. And this is how I'll explain it. There's a reason that military recruiters go to high schools and not to old folks' homes. The people they want are where they go. Manga is going to people they want where they are. They're on YouTube. They're on TikTok. These publishing companies are, on Instagram. They're on these places in a way that is much more likely to connect with the younger participants there than Marvel, DC, Image, comic book creators are. Because the people who are collecting comics are older, so they're interacting in an older way, where manga companies aren't. Right? They're going after the 10-year-olds, wherever they're at. They're putting ads in highlights magazines. It's, you got to be where all right, I'm going to quote Little Mermaid. You got to be where the people are. And if comic books don't get where the people are, who they want, not the people who they already got, then they're not going to have the people they're not going to have the people they think they got when they need them. And I think that's a big part of it. It's, when we talk about people lauding manga over comics because manga is growing and comics are dying, it's not wrong. It isn't. I wouldn't say it's right, but which one's growing faster? Which one's got more money coming in every month? Which one's doing the things? And right now it's manga.
I can understand the reaction though, because I know there's, I'm not going to name drop because I don't like to speak negatively about people. There's a YouTuber I follow that I swear, like every other video, the comment is, well, if Western comics just did what manga's doing, then it'd be saved. And it can get a little old hearing any hot take over and over again. So I do understand that. I just want to make sure that we're like looking at the hobby in a holistic fashion, right? Like I like to, again, looking at things from all sides is a huge part of the origin of this show, and a good way to think about things. So how can we learn from other sides of things, take what works, and then at the same time maybe avoid some of the mistakes they've made as well too, which is it's an interesting perspective.
Yeah, I mean, and like my last kind of thing on this is, when I talk about meeting people where they are. Right. When I talk about this, I feel like in a big way, comics have forgotten who their market are these days. And in that, I mean, the people who are reading comics now fall into one of a few groups. But if you're not making comics that appeal to multiple of those groups, you're just turning the other groups off. Right. If you're looking for people who want value, don't put out 416 covers on 23 different books in a month. You're going to overflood the market. If you want people who are looking for stories, you got to make sure the story inside those 416 covers and 23 books is worth buying any of. You figure out who your market is, and then you build your product to meet your market. And right now, comics are just building their product and hoping the market digs them. If manga is being bought by 15-year-olds, they're making stories for 15-year-olds. And that's the thing. Like, it, for me anymore, I feel like when I go to the comic shop and buy books, they're pandering to me being old. And as much as I am old, as much as I am old, I don't want to be. Ben, I'm reading manga digitally. So I read 5 for like 3 American comics. I read a new manga in print because I can't get the manga I want in print all the time. So I'm reading a lot of manga on Webtoon, reading a lot of manga on Saturday AM, reading a lot of manga other places.
Luke, I think your question, I think we are circling on a couple future topics for shows. And I think your question, I know you asked it a couple times. I think that'll get answered in a future episode. We'll kind of dive into that question, that philosophy. Yeah, like just to kind of, provide some of my closing thoughts on the topic at hand here. I just want people to kind of, I always want people to think about the other side. Think about some of the things that may drive you nuts about your collection, especially if you're opposed to digital in general. Breaking your back, moving comic book boxes. I talk to collectors all the time that feel like they have too many comic books, physical comic books. And if those kinds of things add up to, if you're somebody who goes nuts buying variant covers and you have like that OCD where you need to collect them all, that's not a problem you really run into with digital, for example. I think I've talked to a lot of people that have been opposed to digital. They start reading digital and then they kind of just add it to their toolbox. And that's the way I think about it, right? Like it's a cheaper way to get into some stories that I wouldn't normally read. It's a cheaper way for me to go back and binge read some stuff that I remember reading when I was a kid that I don't have to go out and collect the whole run necessarily. And you know what? Sometimes it does work that way. Sometimes I do read something digitally and I'm like, you know what? I'm actually going to go track down, like a couple key issues from this particular comic book because I really enjoy it. And now I want to own something physically on it too. An important concept that comes up over and over and over again for me is that a high tide raises all ships. And it's extremely important to me in the comic book hobby. And if there's any positivity that comes from reading comic books digitally, for the hobby, for the health of the hobby, more money being put into comic books, people buying more comic books, people talking about comic books more movies getting made, more writers and talent and artists coming to comic books. all of those things are generally speaking a good thing to me, because it means that we are growing the hobby or building up better quality within the hobby. And that is the name of the game to me, to protect what I love so much, which is comic books.
Absolutely. And like we said earlier, no one can tell you how to read.
No.
And you can't tell anybody else. So find what works for you and just read more comics. You know, I'll end with this. When I bought my comic book shop, we were the only manga shop in town. And I hadn't read manga since I was 14 years old. I had to find a way that worked for me to get caught up on the things the people who were coming into my store were looking for. And I did that through digital. I couldn't go back and buy all 7 million copies of Dragon Ball or, you know, of One Piece and those kind of things. I just couldn't do it. So I had to read them digitally. And for me, that was taxing. I didn't love it. But over the years, the idea of digital has changed and it's gotten significantly better. And so for me, it's become an incredibly important tool. So read however is best for you and whatever gets more comics into your system. And at the end of the day, if you do that, then you're right. And it doesn't matter what anyone says. So Bronze Age Nerd doesn't get electrocuted by his computer, although we've done a whole hour. Right. And so that I can go and eat my dinner, which has been smelling very good over on the desk across from me for over an hour. We are going to get out of here, and we will see everybody next week on Devil's Advocates. Join the party. Head over to our link tree to find all the links for everywhere the experience is all the time.